This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast, part of the Sinica Network from SupChina. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, longtime resident of China, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series, and people who cannot distinguish between entomology and etymology bug me in ways in which I cannot put into words. My co-host is John Passon, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of All Set Learning, the Chinese grammar wiki, Sinosplice.com, and his grandpa had the heart of a lion and a lifetime ban from the zoo. What do you do when your dictionary says one thing, but native speakers say it differently? John and I are going to talk about how to handle this and put it to use in your own studies. Interview is with Ryan Alexander Holmes, an actor, popular TikToker, and a black Afro Asian American, or Blasian. All this and more, let's get to it.
Hey guys, this is Jared Turner coming at you from Utah in the United States.
Hi everybody, my name is John Pasden. I am in Shanghai, China. This is the first podcast I've done in a while where I am not in lockdown, so it feels good.
Yeah, how's that coming along, John, your newfound freedom?
It's okay. A lot of stuff isn't open, a lot of testing going on. It's progress, I guess.
All right, well, I guess it's better than being cooped up in your place 24 hours a day, right?
Yes, better.
All right, before we get started today, we do have a review and a listener question. I'll go ahead and kick off with the review that we have. This comes from Diego from Instagram. So Diego sent me a message, and here's what he had to say. He said, "Hey, I just want to give you and John some credit. Because of the awesome people you had on the podcast and hearing their stories, it gave me the confidence to apply for a Mandarin teaching position at an international school here in New Jersey. Now I'm 4 months in as a Mandarin TA, fully immersed with native teacher in a bilingual class. Thank you for motivating and fueling the flame whenever I feel like giving up. Jiao." Hey, well, that's awesome, Diego. And I should also say that Diego's job is he's like an engineer. He's like some sort of engineer, and he's like, "Hey, I want to be a Mandarin Chinese teaching assistant now," and he's got a job. That's pretty cool.
Wow, that is great. Way to make it happen, man. Okay, and then over here, I have a user question. So this is from Jago, and this person asks about improving listening, specifically using the audio from our books. And the person says, "Is there a way to use your audiobooks or another audio resource that can build fluency in the same way reading graded readers do? I.e. where the simplicity comes from the vocabulary quotas, but can still be read at a fast pace. I can turn up the speed, but so far I have found this slightly ruins the stress and rhythm. Or do I just need to accept that there is going to be a gap in difficulty between learning materials and native level content?" All right, so that's kind of a hard question. But I think what this boils down to is that graded readers are reading material, and reading lots of graded readers really helps your reading. And we do have audio, and that can definitely help. It gives you that additional input. But if you're really working on listening, then what you want to do is to be able to hear something that you've never heard before and instantly understand it, right? And to do that, you need a variety of lots of different things. And you need to hear the same words over and over in different contexts, different types of sentences. So just doing the audio for graded readers isn't going to be enough. It's going to help. It's a nice supplement. It's nice to listen to something that you've already read, and it does reinforce. But it's not going to really build up that listening comprehension like you're hoping.
I think I'd like to add that the graded reader stuff. It's a great start, right? It's I want to say that it's the most important is that that's where you're starting, and I'm guessing that overall Jago's Chinese level here is probably still maybe at a maybe elementary, intermediate level. And so this is also part of that process of building your proficiency in the language and gaining more knowledge and being more proficient in it. And so that's just. Yeah, so he says, is there always going to be that gap between learning materials and native level content? Absolutely. And that can be a difficult gap to jump, but it's just part of the process. You're going to take more time to learn and grow in the language.
So I have worked with people that have made this jump by listening to different kinds of materials. And one that's really good for that, which is focused on audio, is Chinese Pod. So you're listening to lots of different, conversations using, pretty high frequency vocabulary. And that kind of, massive input is what builds better listening comprehension.
That's right. So there you go, Jago. Hopefully that helps a little bit. And I think ultimately you're going to have to keep working at this and keep listening to more and more things, and things will become a little clearer over time. Now, for today's discussion, John, we have quite an amorphous topic, I would say, but it's something that's really pertinent and important for language learners.
Yeah, so we're talking about this phenomenon where you want your Chinese to be correct. We all know it's really hard to get those tones right, but you want to know the correct tones. You want to produce them correctly. But then sometimes you get feedback from native speakers, which is confusing. And it doesn't maybe match stuff you've gotten before. Maybe it doesn't match the dictionary. So let me give an example. And I think this happens a lot once you get to the intermediate level, especially if you're living in a Chinese-speaking environment. So for example, you want to know how to say download, and you look it up. And the dictionary says, 下在, 2 fourth tones. And then you go out and you use it, and people understand you. But then you notice when they say it, they seem to be saying it differently. It's like they're saying 下在, like it's fourth, third. And you're like, I guess I misremembered that. I must be wrong. But then later you look in the dictionary, and it's like, no, it is 4-4. But then everyone is saying 4-3. So this is one of those cases where what you're actually hearing, what people are saying, does not match the dictionary.
Yeah, this is not uncommon, of course. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this.
Yeah, if you're a beginner, it's not going to be such an issue. But there are a few words when you get to intermediate and above where it starts to happen. And so when that happens, what do you do? And this relates to a linguistic phenomenon called the prescriptivist approach and the descriptivist approach. So being prescriptive is like, this is right, and this is how you should talk. And if you don't talk this way or write this way, then you're wrong. So that's kind of a traditional textbooky, strict grammar teacher kind of approach.
I.e. grammar Nazi.
Something like that, yeah. But then there's like the more scientific, empirical observation, like that kind of approach, which is the descriptivist approach, which is, well, this is what we're seeing, this is what people are saying, and if everyone is saying 下在, fourth, third, then it looks like that's kind of the way you say it. And the dictionary, trying to tell people that's not the way it is, seems to be a little behind the times.
When I was growing up, I had a couple teachers that were always saying, the word ain't. Ain't is not a word because it ain't in the dictionary, right? So it's wrong, But if you said the word ain't, which for any non-native English speakers, it means it's ain't. How do I define ain't? It's like ain't means it's not. That's kind of the meaning of it, right?
Is not, are not.
There you go. And so, but if you said ain't, people would understand what you mean.
Okay, so if you're being descriptive, then you're noticing people do say ain't. And that prescriptive approach is to say, you can't say that, that's wrong. And by the way, in a lot of dictionaries now, there is the word ain't.
That's right.
So that it's not in the dictionary argument doesn't really work anymore. Because in general, English language dictionaries are much more descriptive than Chinese language dictionaries. So that's something to keep in mind. There's this cultural aspect, this kind of submission to authority and kind of conformity. One thing that I found really frustrating is when I became aware of this phenomenon. Sometimes people speak in a way that doesn't match the dictionary, and they would say something like, "Hey, what did you say? Did you say third tone there?" I'd try to observe what they were saying, and they'd be like, "Wait, what? No." And then they'll change their story. They'll realize that they were pronouncing it the way they always do rather than the correct way, and they'll try to change their story. And I used to get so frustrated with this because I wanted to know how people really talk. I don't want a bunch of robots that are following the dictionary. I want to talk like Chinese people talk, right?
So what do we do then, John? We run across a situation where, hey, I'm convinced this is how it's supposed to be said, or I've even looked it up in the dictionary and I'm saying it the proper way, but other people on the street or just in the area I'm speaking with or the people I'm talking with or say it in a different way with different tones.
Well, it's just something that's a little more complicated than maybe is comfortable for some people, but you just have to be aware of it. And I think most of us, we want to be correct, but we also don't want to speak in a way that is counter to what everyone else is saying. They don't want to sound like a dictionary if that means not sounding like a human being, right? But let me go into this a little bit more because it's actually more complicated than this. So the example of 下载 and 下载, meaning download, is kind of an extreme example. And another one which is very similar is, do you know how to say wonton in Chinese, Jared?
饺子皮, but that's a specific type of.
So not
饺子,
饺子.
I'm not trying to. Not
different dumpling. Got to get the dumpling right.
I don't know the right one. I just know 饺子皮, so help me out, John.
All right, so usually people will call it 馄饨, which is second, fourth.
Yes.
But and the way that most people come across this issue is they try to type it in pinyin, and then you type HUN, and it doesn't come up. It's like these other characters which are not the food, and you're just like, what is going on here? And it's because the quote unquote correct way to spell it is HUNTUN. And then not only is it a T, but it's a neutral tone. So it's 馄饨, which nobody says. So it's another one of these extreme examples where the dictionary is just like totally on its own, and everyone else is just like, what are you doing? But in actual life, most examples are not quite that extreme. So you'll have stuff that like, you'll have words where, some people say it this way and some people say it that way, and the dictionary takes a certain side. Or you have other words where people in Beijing, they all say it this way, but in Shanghai, they say it that way. And the dictionary sides with Beijing, of course, but the Shanghainese don't care. And then do you want to pronounce the word like a Beijinger if you're living in Shanghai, or do you want to be aware of how the Shanghainese pronounce it and be like more one of them? So it's actually a little bit of a question of identity.
And I think that's a really good point to bring out is about it's kind of that spectrum of correctness. Is that how you'd put it, John?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
That, it's like how correct is it with the people that you're speaking with? There are a number of things like that. When I started learning Chinese, I was living in Shanghai, and I started pronouncing certain words a certain way according to as I heard them and heard people speak them. And I later on found out, wait, whoa, that's not right. I had someone from Beijing or somewhere else like you're saying it wrong. I'm like, but that's how I say it to the guy at the fruit stand or the taxi driver, right? One specific word I remember was the word for road, lu, right? But in Shanghai, I learned it luo, like it's like this luo, right? But that's like kind of the Shanghainese accent, and that's how most of the people would say it there in Shanghai. So, and finally, I had to correct it back to lu, and of course, they understand me if I say lu. But if I say luo to people that weren't from Shanghai, they're like, what? What's that?
Yeah, so there's definitely this role of the local dialect, the fangyan, the tapalect, like affecting it. And sometimes that's just like an SH pronounced as S in all words, but other times it really is like a bigger difference, and that just falls on the spectrum. So I think the very end of the spectrum would be just someone who is from a different part of town, their Mandarin is not standard, no one agrees with their pronunciation, and so in that case, maybe the descriptivist approach would be like, well, they're a native speaker too, and their pronunciation is valid. All right, fine. People can understand them, but that's not the kind of speech that you're going to want to emulate, right? You're going to want to.
That's right.
You're going to want to hopefully be able to understand them. So so that's the other end of the spectrum.
So I think it's being aware of that, right? Is everyone you're going to speak to has quote unquote an accent, right? Whether it's like the standard Mandarin accent or wherever they come from, they're going to have maybe some words or pronunciations, sometimes even tone changes, right? That are going to be different to what you're going to be used to or what you're hearing online or seen in textbooks.
Right, but as you get to a higher level, like intermediate and above, there are going to be very specific words where you're going to notice if you're really paying attention, and so you want to be aware of this. But also this idea of native speakers versus dictionaries and prescriptivist versus descriptive, approaches. It also affects what you learn and how you learn. So, think about it. If you want to learn Mandarin and you're living in, say Shanghai, do you take the HSK textbook as your Bible? Or is it something else which is more directly relevant to how you're going to be using Chinese? because the HSK is a standardized test, right? And so that's kind of like the prescriptivist approach. Like, this is the Chinese you need to learn, and if you learn this, you'll be fine. But, you know, if someone were to observe your life and create a textbook around, you know, what environment you're actually in, it's not going to match up exactly, right? So you need to understand when you're choosing what to learn that there is the same issue at play here.
Well, so what do you do about that, John?
Well, I mean, if you just want to pass the HSK, then fine. That's great. No problem. But, like, if you want to study HSK 5 to do better at your management meetings in Chinese, well, sure, there's some overlap, but that's not exactly the greatest fit, right?
Totally.
Even if you look at the HSK 5 outline, it's like, need to be able to cover management meetings. Well, that still doesn't mean it's the best thing, right?
You know, John, as we're talking about this, what kind of comes to my mind is that this kind of goes back to, like, what are your goals for using the language?
Jared, not again.
I recall
goals again.
I know, gosh, goals. But I bring up something that comes to mind was an interview that we had. It's back in episode number 10 with John D'Andrea. Now, John's kind of an old-timer for learning Chinese. He first went to China back like in the 80s, soon after the open door policy, and it was his first time actually like being immersed and actually using the language to speak. And he went to Lanzhou, which is a little bit like in the central of China. And he really improved his proficiency when he was living there with his wife, and I think they had a kid while they were out there. Crazy times, some great stories, great interview. You have to go back to it, episode number 10. But he picked up a Lanzhou accent, and he didn't realize it till he was on a train going back to Beijing after he'd been in the country for maybe like a year, and people were like laughing at him. Oh, what, you sound like a country bumpkin, you know? And he was like, oh no, and so he tried to adapt and change that and improve his Chinese in that respect. But the point I'm thinking about this is that if you're going out to live in Lanzhou and that your whole focus, your career or wherever it is, and you start speaking like the people there, hey, that's fine. You know, I'm like, that's the point. I'm like, it may not be a big of issue like that. And if you have some family members that you're speaking with, you know, you've married into a family or whatever, you have some people, you know, shopkeeper or just in community that you've kind of integrated with, and you're speaking Chinese with them, but they say you have a unique accent or they say some words in certain ways. Well, use your Chinese like that. That could be totally fine. It's ultimately, I think at the end of the day, what are your goals? Who are you speaking with? And how are you trying to connect with people using Chinese?
Yeah, so the whole descriptivist, prescriptivist thing really relates to your environment. So for him, he was out in Lanzhou. Okay, so I'm going to speak like they speak. So like a descriptivist approach, not following the Beijing dictionary, whatever. But then if he moves and he's in another city, then he becomes the outlier, and maybe the slightly more prescriptivist approach makes a little more sense because the environment has changed. So it's just something you need to be aware of. And I also want to mention, like especially compared to English, that the Chinese dictionaries do not update that fast. Like the word download is not really a new word anymore, guys. But the dictionary isn't getting updated. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, but it still says Xia Zai last time I checked. So it's just something you need to keep in mind, especially when you get to the intermediate level and above. And also we have a page on the pronunciation wiki at Allset Learning that lists out a bunch of these words. And if you have any other ones and you want to email them in, that would also be cool. Because once you get to the higher levels, it's cool to be aware of these.
So I think the takeaway from this episode is don't trust dictionaries ever. Okay, a little bit, with a grain of salt. All right, now it's time for a word from our sponsor. And today our sponsor is
Mandarin Companion Graded Readers. And today we want to tell you about an awesome story called The Ransom of Red Chief.
This is a level 1 graded reader using only 300 basic characters. And this story was a lot of fun to do.
Yeah, so Ransom of Red Chief is a classic short story by O. Henry. We really like doing short stories, like Country of the Blind was another story based on a short story, because it gives us a lot of room to kind of flesh out the Chinese adaptation however we want. So in our story, it's not a cowboys and Indians tale, you may be shocked to learn.
That's right, but it is about a very naughty boy who gets kidnapped by two hoodlums who are looking to make some quick cash. And in kidnapping him and holding him for ransom, they find out that they actually ended up kidnapping the naughtiest kid in town. In fact, he's so naughty that his father says, no, I'm not going to pay you ransom. You're going to have to give me money to take him back. And hijinks ensue. So it's a pretty funny story. The Ransom of Red Chief, it's a level 1 graded reader. You can go out there and get it today, wherever you get your books.
Enjoy.
All right, now it's time for rants and raves. John, what do you have for us today? Do you have a rant or do you have a rave?
All right, so I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to do a mini rant followed by my actual rave. And so the mini rant relates to this podcast. We've done so many rants and raves. It feels like I have to pick something super obscure or something like really new because I'm having real trouble coming up with new ones after all this time. But I do have a rave today, and I'm taking it old school. And this is following a consulting conversation I had with one of my All-Set Learning clients about using flashcards and learning. And it just reminded me something that we probably said years ago on this very podcast, but it's worth saying again. And that is, reading is the original spaced repetition. Like, if you're reading enough, you don't need flashcards. If you're reading enough, you don't need Anki. It takes a while to get to that level. Graded readers will help you get there. But reading is just great, and flashcards can't really compare. So reading, it's awesome.
Yeah, I concur. John.
All right, Jared, what do you got? Rant or rave?
I've got a rave, John. This is about reading. Funny enough, we did not coordinate this. I promise there's no conspiracy here. Okay, but I have been reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, 小屁孩日记. So in Chinese there. And I just got to get a plug for it because it's just hilarious. If any of you have ever read any of these books, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, it's by Jeff Kinney. It's been around for quite a while. It's popular. The books are funny. I enjoy them. I've got kids, and I can also relate to the hijinks of these. This kid here growing up. There's a lot of things I could relate to. But I'm actually reading it in Chinese. And I don't know, it's just hilarious because it's like there's not a lot of things that I've read in Chinese which I think are really, really funny, and this story translated into Chinese is just really good. And I'm learning a lot of different words and things that's like more able for me to like talk to my kids or things that they're encountering, and so it's a lot of fun. But I think one of the things, John, I'm really enjoying about this is that I have tutors, and I've through All-Set,
awesome.
And what I'm also enjoying about this aspect of it is that, like, I get to explain some very unique things about, like, maybe American culture to my Chinese teacher. So, like, the book I'm reading right now, it's talking a lot about Christmas and stuff. And so I'm talking about some of these cultural things that relate to Christmas. And, like, you have Santa's Little Helper. No, not Santa. Sorry, it's Elf. And like in the book, he's talking about elf on a shelf. And I hate that concept, the elf on a shelf. This is like an elf that like watches you and reports back to Santa Claus if you're doing something good or bad. And there's the nice list and the naughty list and things like that. So it's just been really fun to like talking about that to my tutor, and just a lot of fun different things. But it's going through it, I'm encountering a lot of new words or things that I wouldn't normally encounter. But it's because I'm enjoying the book. It's actually a lot of fun to read this. And giving that plug for the spaced repetition, yeah, I'm going back and like rereading because I'm trying to get reinforcement sometimes for some of these new words, and I have some questions of some of the grammar and context that I'm coming across. And it's great. I don't know. I just really enjoy it. So Diary of a Wimpy Kid, 小屁孩日记 in Chinese. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. Have you read any of those books, John?
Just a little bit. It was funny. I went with my kids to the bookstore and I saw these versions in English that were imported. They're like 50 kuai. And then I saw the Chinese versions and they were a lot cheaper. And I was like, oh, but I kind of want to read these to my kids in English. Well, but I picked up the Chinese version and flipped to the back, and the English is all in the back. So the Chinese version is cheaper and you get both Chinese and English.
Did you get the books for your kids, John?
Yeah, we got a few of those. So anyway, go Chinese or go home.
Or go home. Exactly.
Ryan Alexander Holmes, and I am Blasian, or Afro Asian American, and I like to talk about it a lot. Matter of fact, I won't shut up about it.
Ryan has amassed quite a following on social media and creates a lot of funny videos that Chinese learners can relate to. You should check it out.
You'll see videos on my Instagram and my TikTok, just being proud about my heritage and sharing that with people. I'm also an actor, and I'm based in Los Angeles.
Ryan's story is one of self-discovery and finding his own identity amid the pulls and influence of multiple and at times conflicting cultures, and ultimately, wholeheartedly and unapologetically embracing who he is. Stay with us. All right, Ryan, why did you start learning Chinese?
My DNA from my mother told me to do it. So that's why I did it. Also, I just I grew up with my Chinese family. My dad's side of the family lives in Jacksonville, Florida. So geographically, I would see them, but geographically they were far away. But my mom's whole Chinese family, her immediate family lived in America, but also lived in Los Angeles. So we would, I'd go to my grandma's house all the time. We'd have family dinners all the time. I'd hang out with my cousins who were Chinese. But my grandma does not speak English. And so when I do, go to have lunch with her every week, it's pretty much all in Mandarin,
But, there's a lot of heritage learners like you, who grow up speaking Chinese. But most heritage learners are coming from families where, both parents are Chinese. You have your father, you could speak English to him. But, what was that preferred language at home? And, how did you do you think you started really picking up Chinese?
So, it came in stages, right? When I was a kid, I was pretty much fluent in Chinese, off the bat, because that's the language I first learned, with English. And then as I grew up and, I was in school and stuff like that, even though I was in a Chinese neighborhood, the preferred language, the language that we were taught in was English. But still, I was going to Chinese after school and Chinese school on the weekends. So my Chinese was still hanging on for dear life. And then when I got to high school, they didn't have a Chinese option like they do now of language. So I chose Latin. I don't remember any Latin whatsoever. And they said it was supposed to help on the SAT, but I didn't feel like it did. And so sort of high school up to now, it's been up to me, you know, it's been my responsibility. Mm-hmm. So trying to find ways to sort of continue to hear that so that I could keep speaking to my grandma. Mm. So I'll watch movies. I'll literally watch kids' cartoons in Mandarin just for 10 minutes every day. So to sort of kind of, keep hearing it. I'll listen to Chinese music because I can sing. So I'll memorize those songs and just sing those songs. So I keep the pronunciation in there. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, tell me, Ryan, a little bit about this experience of growing up. Okay. So I think, this is a podcast. People can't see you. But, if you say your mom's Chinese, I'm looking at you. I'm like, what? You don't look Asian at all, right?
Yeah. That's what people say a lot of the time. And here's the thing. When I look in the mirror, I see myself and I'm not comparing myself to other people. I'm I know who my mom is. Mm-hmm. I know who my dad is. I know that I'm Chinese. So literally I do look Chinese because I am. Mm-hmm. Now, from the greater context of the world and what people think Chinese features are, of course that's going to play into the context of how people see me. And I'm not blind to that. I don't get mad at people for saying that I don't look Asian or don't look Chinese. It's kind of a catchphrase. It's is it that I don't look Asian? Or is it that you've just never seen an Asian like me before?
That's a great way to put it.
Because you had to flip it on.
That's great.
Yeah, because I flip it on its head because it's in my DNA.
Yeah.
I am Chinese, so therefore I look Chinese. It's pretty simple. Mm-hmm. Yet people have never seen me before, right? I think a lot of what I do on social media and in the content that I create, in the writing that I write, is sort of flipping that idea on its head. I don't have to look, I don't have to be, I don't have to sound the way that you think I should sound. in order for you to accept me as what I identify as.
Did that impact growing up at all? Like you have a lot of Chinese,
Yeah.
full out 100% Asian family like
Full
around
out.
you.
It was interesting growing up because in the household, I was Chinese. I was acculturated Chinese. My father was there, obviously still black. But the only thing that sort of makes my people, Chinese people, not see me as one of them is my appearance.
Mm-hmm.
But I grew up eating the same food. I grew up speaking the same language. I know the history. I know all the cultural peculiarities. I have all the items, that most Chinese people have in their home. I have the habits that most Chinese people have. I have the same kind of grandma, the mom, you know what I mean? That say the same things and say the same phrases. And so I think that's what's very interesting to people is that like, I know everything that they know.
Mm.
Yet when they look at me, they're like, how the hell do you know that? And it's like, because I'm you. That's why.
I may not look like you, but I am.
Exactly. But growing up, I didn't embrace that.
Mm.
I wanted to be what people wanted to think I was because as a kid, you just want to be accepted and you want to be popular and you don't want people to question you or bully you. So for me, it's like, well, there was no black kids in the entire neighborhood that I was in.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was Asian and it was white. And they're like, Ryan, but you don't sound black and you don't act black. And a part of me was like, well, I guess I need to. So let me watch BET and wear what the rappers wear and wear what the NBA players are wearing and try to speak like them. You know what I mean? So I had an identity crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Those formative years sort of have a huge impact on you. So it wasn't until like 2 years ago in 2020 during the pandemic, during Black Lives Matter, while George Floyd was murdered and then elderly Asians were being attacked, that I'm like, oh, I have this whole world of understanding and knowledge and experience that I want to share with the world. Why am I not? Especially during the pandemic where there was no auditions for acting. I couldn't do anything. I had to stay in my apartment by myself. And as an artist, I was going crazy. I didn't have social media at that time.
Mm.
And so I'm like, how can I get this word out? How can I share my experience? How can I help? How can I be a bridge? How can I make people laugh? How can I, use the hundreds of thousands of dollars I spent for drama grad school? How can I put it to use?
Yeah. I'm curious to know a little bit, Ryan, like about that process of like kind of navigating that. Because that's something like we all go through is like kind of finding our identity.
Yeah.
Like being able to connect with who we are. And I can relate to that also, like the youth aspect, right? We're all insecure. We're trying to figure out who we are.
So
right?
insecure.
So like, how do you think about yourself now?
I think now as opposed to the past, there's been a huge difference because I used to be ashamed of being Asian. I used to feel like I had to code switch in every environment that I would go into. If I was with white people, I'd act a certain way. If I was with Asian people, I'd act a certain way. Maybe I'd hide my blackness or try to sound more professional. And when I was with black people, I didn't want people to know all these other parts of me. Right. Mm-hmm. But now I'm like, yo, I'm just who I am, man. Like, and I don't need to code switch to fit in. I may code switch to communicate better to the person. Right. But I'm not code switching to fit in or erase myself in order to be accepted. Right. It's a complete shift in terms of identity and embracing my identity. And I do think that's a universal thing. I don't think people need to be black and Asian or even mixed race to really understand what it means to embrace who you are and be proud of who you are and where you come from, Yeah,
that makes a lot of... I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you kind of grew up then speaking Chinese, at home, but you mentioned something. You went to those... I have yet to find a heritage learner like you who has not attended those weekend Chinese classes.
I think it's just like a rite of passage, man. Like,
seriously.
You also struggled to find a heritage learner that didn't kind of hate the experience of doing it because we were all forced to go. We wouldn't go on our own accord because Chinese school wasn't fun. Chinese school was like, man, they put you to work in those classes. They put you to work.
Maybe you could enlighten us a little bit about that experience, because, I mean, unless you're a heritage learner, you're probably not going to know what this is like.
I mean, I didn't do Kumon, but I did a version of that. It's like an after-school tutoring, but also they teach you new things and stuff, like give you workbooks and stuff like that. I did that for years. You know, I go to elementary school and then they pick us up in a bus and then we go to the Chinese after school program where they teach us Chinese, they teach us math, social studies, and they tutor us.
Oh, delightful.
That was a little more fun. But Chinese school on the weekend was like 6 hours of just Chinese.
Oh, 6 hours.
Yeah, something like that.
It probably felt like 6 hours.
There we go. It felt like 6 hours. I'm not going to go on record saying it was, but damn, it felt like prison almost. My mom would drop me and my brother off and then she'd just leave us there, and it felt like time would move so slow and the teacher wouldn't speak English. So we had to just figure it out. And I think we learned a lot of Chinese, just like you said, when you were telling me your story, like you moved to Shanghai not knowing Chinese.
Yeah.
It felt sort of like that. They're like, we're just going to throw you in there. Because I think we came in a little bit later. Like we didn't come in when everyone else came in. We came in when we were a bit older.
Yeah.
So like they had like a curriculum of years. We just like learned it in the household. Then they threw us in there.
So you're swimming, trying to keep your head above water.
Yeah, we're trying to keep our heads above water. They did this game where they would pass a marker around, almost like hot potato. And then if it landed on you, you'd have to read the sentence and respond to the questions in Chinese. Uh-huh. And I remember my brother and I, when we'd get the marker, we'd try to pass it as fast as we could because we didn't want to answer the questions in Chinese. But also having gone to Shanghai and basically had to speak Chinese because there was no option of speaking English. Mm-hmm. I think that is kind of the best way to learn a language. Just necessity. Like you cannot rely on your native tongue. You have to speak the language of the country that you're in. I think it's the best way to learn.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be really effective for sure. Ryan, I kind of hear from you like your perspective. So like at the beginning you had said, all right, I was forced to learn, right? And you didn't really enjoy it. But at what point do you feel like maybe things switched where you kind of found your own reason to learn? There's a lot of heritage learners like you who resist, you know, at early ages, but at some point they embrace it. And what do you feel like that was for you, where things kind of changed?
Oh man, we talked about people not thinking that I'm Chinese, right? So when I would just speak Chinese, there was always like a kerfuffle about it because I didn't speak like a Uyghur, and I spoke like I could pronounce the words right, and I could get the tones right.
You sound native, right?
Yeah, they'd be like, "Oh my God, how do you speak Chinese?" And I'm like, "Well, because I am Chinese." As a kid, that kind of made me feel like an outsider to the point where I just didn't want to experience that. I didn't want the extra attention. I just wanted to speak my language to my people. I think now it's become something that I embrace. It's like, yeah, no, I know I probably don't look like I'm Chinese, but my Chinese is pretty good, but also I am Chinese. And I like having that conversation with people as opposed to allowing myself to feel like an outsider when I'm not, right? They might think I'm an outsider and speak to me that way, but I could just speak to them and be like, I'm actually Chinese. Isn't that cool?
What?
You know, you're speaking to one of your own.
Where are you encountering these types of situations where you speak and people are like, what? You can speak? Yeah.
I mean, almost every time I speak Chinese to a Chinese person.
Well, what was that like when you went to China?
I went there for a study abroad program while I was at UC Berkeley. And I wanted to go there to learn the language, but also study business. I also signed with a modeling agency out there. So I modeled a lot in China, which was very interesting.
I totally get that. My kids were models in China.
There you go.
That's awesome.
It's a crazy industry.
I could definitely see that. Definitely.
And so I did that and I made a pretty penny and I went to class kind of, but I went there thinking like, oh, I'm going to go and it's going to be this magical experience because I'm going to be accepted by my people and there's going to be a red carpet. And it's like, our prodigal son hath returned to his homeland. I thought I was going to feel that, but I absolutely didn't. I felt like an outsider still. And when I look back and I'm like, of course you did. I didn't change my perspective. I thought my perspective would be changed if I just was in that environment without doing the work, without understanding like, listen, people are going to see you a certain way. And you could try to prove it, or you can just embrace who you are and let them see it, right? Come from that place of joy and your heritage, as opposed to like, I'm an outsider. Let me prove to you that I'm Chinese. So my mom is from Taiwan. She was born and raised in Taiwan, but we still call ourselves Jiangxiren because my grandpa is from Jiangxi province in mainland, but came to Taiwan after the war because he was in the nationalist party.
Yeah.
My grandma's from Shanghai, the city that my grandma grew up. My grandma's an immigrant, right? She left Shanghai when she was 16 and never saw her parents again until she was, 40, 45 or something like that. Because she had to go to Taiwan to escape the communist revolution, right? Yeah. But she couldn't go back and her parents couldn't come with her. And so to go there after all those years and just be in the same city, breathing that same air that my grandma did in that city, sounds kind of cheesy, but it did feel like a homecoming. I did feel more connected to my Chinese heritage from just being there.
Well, that's really neat. Just being able to connect with like sometimes your roots. And I imagine perhaps it's maybe solidifying that sense of identity, right? It's like, hey, this place is real.
Yeah.
You walk in the streets, the places where she walked.
I mean, Shanghai though, man, they've been developing the crap out of that place. Yes. And it's like, because I was there, 10 years ago? It probably doesn't even look the same as it did 10 years ago.
I'm sure it's changed quite a bit. 2 years in Shanghai is like a decade anywhere else. So.
Yeah. They got robot dogs delivering messages and stuff and food, and we ain't got no robot dogs out here.
No, ain't no robot dogs. That trip to China, how did that really impact your identity?
As an Asian American going there and experiencing the people, what I experienced was interesting because it was different than the other Asian Americans I went with. A lot of the American-born Chinese people felt like outsiders there.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm talking to my roommates and they're like, man, the way they treat me, man, why do they treat me like this? Why do they not even accept me? And I'm like, wow, welcome to the club. Welcome to my world, man. You know what I mean? So now we're relating on the fact that like, we both feel like outsiders to these people in mainland China, but I'm telling them that when I'm in America, I felt like an outsider to them. And they're like, whoa, they can have empathy and compassion and understanding for my experience now that they're experiencing it in the homeland. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And I can also find communion with them and feel like you weren't really treating me as an outsider. You just were sort of conditioned to believe that the way that I look deserved a certain treatment for good or for worse. But I don't have to let that define me. Just like I'm telling them, you don't have to let these mainland people and their treatment of you define how you treat yourself and talk to them. You can laugh about it like I laugh about it now, because it's really not that they're treating you like an outsider. It's that you're allowing how they treat you to make you feel like an outsider. And there's a big difference. So the most important lesson that I learned pretty much on that trip was I can determine how I feel about myself and my heritage, and I can be proud in the way that I want to be proud. I don't have to acquiesce. I don't have to kowtow. I don't have to prove it to those people. The only person I need to prove it to is myself. And that's a joyful experience if I allow it to be.
A very good place to be, right? You're secure in who you are.
Yeah.
I'm also interested to know about that experience. Like, did you overall feel like you were more accepted in China than your ABC friends who were there with you?
Not accepted in terms of being Chinese, but accepted as like, oh, you're really cool. Like,
yeah.
We've never seen something like you before and you speak the language. So we can like go hang out and play basketball and stuff, and I can show you off to my friends. You know what I mean? When I was walking around, people would stare at me. Kids would like try to touch my hair.
I was going to say the hair,
skin.
Touching your hair.
Yeah. Or try to hold my hand and take pictures with me. And at first I'm like, do they think I'm a famous person? Because China was such a monoracial country. And I mean, it still is, but it was cut off from the rest of the world until what, the 80s?
Yeah.
They're like brand new sort of to this multicultural game of having foreigners come in a more substantial way to see them more. Yeah, they've seen Jordan, but not in person. Yeah, they've seen LeBron, but not in person.
Did you ever tell someone you're like, yeah, I'm LeBron?
So I remember going to Beijing when I was 18 with this leadership group. It was like a week-long trip. And they kept saying NBA to me. NBA? NBA? Because I'm like 6'3", which is like super tall out there.
Yeah,
but like
yeah.
not that tall in America.
Yeah.
And they were always asking me that. And I'm like, no. And then at a certain point, I was like, yes.
Yes.
Yes,
I am.
NBA.
Yes, NBA.
Yes. You want to take a picture with me? Okay, yes.
I always joke that it's probably true that there's pictures of, us foreigners all over China on someone's like mantle, their shelf.
Yeah. Like, because like, where do these pictures go? You know what I mean? Like, what's the history of the picture? Like, I would love to just know where those pictures went,
I've realized like in Shanghai, if you're just around like normal Shanghainese people, they see foreigners. They've been seeing them for decades now, so it's not a big deal. But you go to the tourist locations, like you go to the Bund, you go to like Nanjing Road.
That's where it happened.
Because those people from out of town, wow, I've seen like one or two foreigners in my life, and now they're everywhere. I've never seen a black foreigner.
Exactly.
So crazy stuff.
Exactly. Also, I'm on TikTok and I'm on social media. I see black people talk about their experiences in China. And sometimes I'm like, listen, it's not racism, really. I mean, I'm sure there is racism, and I experienced just a little bit of it when I was in Shanghai. But it's not like the racism in America.
It is different.
It's not like that homegrown American racism. The authentic stuff. It's not like that. It's completely different. It's more so obliviousness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people mistake the obliviousness for racism.
Mm-hmm.
There is a spectrum of racism. And on that scale, America and South Africa are at the top.
Mm.
But China is not at the top.
Yeah.
And I think people really need to understand that, because there's a lot of miscommunication. And because I'm black and Asian and black and Chinese, like, I want people to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just generalize these people as racist, because then you just become your own worst enemy. Especially if you don't speak the same language. You don't even know what they're saying. You know what I mean? There was a video of a Chinese farmer in his cotton field eating watermelon that also grew on his cotton field. He was eating it and talking about how good it tasted and talking about how soft his cotton is. And it went viral on TikTok because a lot of black creators, just creators in general, were saying how racist it was. And I'm like, do you not understand that there are cotton fields in China, and in those cotton fields, watermelons grow and they eat them because they're delicious?
Yeah.
Why are we allowing how we've been treated in America from racists to dictate how we treat other people who are just going about their daily lives?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's true. It's just also from the cultural context, right? What is racist or not? It all depends on your point of view, your context, where you're coming from, where you're looking at things. Even that time period, right? I think Chinese, a lot of times, they're just very curious. They have questions because they've never been exposed to as much racial diversity. So they are curious.
Yeah.
And sometimes we take those questions that are really innocent that can be construed as, racist.
Yeah, exactly. I think intention is important, and context, like you said, is super important.
Yeah. I will say white privilege is very real in China. I've cashed in on that.
Hey, I honestly think that people should. I mean, find your opportunities. Like when I went to China, I definitely found my opportunity, and that was being literally the only Chinese and black model in all of China. So they're flying me around everywhere, and I was making money and shooting.
Dude, that was good.
For brands and stuff like that. So
I guess adult model, you're probably getting about 1,000 kwai an hour more.
Less than that back then, but still a lot. Yeah, and they're flying me different places. I was like, where am I going? I have no idea, but I'm going because you're paying me. After like a month, after doing a bunch of jobs, they'd pay me in a fat wad of cash. Man. Like I was a drug dealer. Yeah. And I was like, what the? What
That's how it's all done, money? Nowadays it'd be WeChat. But regardless, man, you fat stacks of cash.
Yeah.
I think the most popular models, the adult models I saw, were the ones, I call it, with the light Asian look. So they're hunshui, right? So they're half, but they look Asian, but not too Asian.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. When I went to my agency, they literally said this, and this is the inquisitive nature of things and intention. They were literally like, if you were dark black, we wouldn't want you because we wouldn't be able to get work with you. But since you're not, we're going to accept you, and we do think that you can get a lot of work. And I was like, damn. Like, you would be canceled if you said something like that in America. But like, that's true in your market. You're thinking about it as a business decision. And you're thinking about your audience, and your audience is just Chinese people.
I think it's actually good because even think about this, is that things happen and culture changes over time and perceptions take time.
Yeah.
So the great thing is that you even have that opportunity. And it's one of those things, just kind of slowly moving the marker, slowly expanding the diversity of perception of race and things like that in China.
Yeah. They definitely don't think that way anymore. I feel like with me modeling out there, I think with the Jordan brand becoming so huge and musical artists and rap artists becoming so huge, I feel like it's completely different now because people are starting to see African Americans of all shades out there. Times change, and we also have to understand the context of the country that we're speaking about and that we're in, which is, China, which is hasn't had that much opportunity until recently to even explore these multicultural avenues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Well, Ryan, what advice would you give to yourself if you could go back in time to a young Ryan? What advice would you give to yourself growing up?
The first thing that pops into my mind is don't be afraid to stand alone. I think when I learned that is when I really started to blossom because I wasn't relying on anybody else to give me a stamp of approval or validation. I had to reach into my own self and my own insecurities and also the things that I was proud about and share them. Sharing both, being vulnerable is really, I think, the most important thing, in my opinion, for any human.
Looking down the road too, let's, fast forward 20, 30 years, maybe having a family of your own, what kind of legacy do you hope to pass down to your posterity?
In the Chinese lineage, legacy is extremely important. But also on my dad's side, he's created a legacy on his own. He escaped poverty. He was the first to graduate from college. He was the first to get a law degree. He moved out to Los Angeles on his own, started his own law firm eventually. His idea was always to create a legacy. And so for me, it's like continuing my father's legacy, but also continuing my Chinese heritage and that legacy too. I don't have kids. I'm not married, but my brother is married and has 2 daughters, and they're already speaking Chinese. We already give them Chinese nicknames. So in our family, what my dad started, he's the first initialed R-A-H. He's Reginald Andrew Holmes. I'm Ryan Alexander Holmes. My brother is Reynolds Alistair Holmes. My oldest brother is Robert Andrew Holmes. And so now we have Riley Alvarez Holmes, my oldest brother's daughter. And then we all call each other I'm Xiao Si, which is kind of unfortunate in Chinese culture.
At least it's not Xiao San, right?
Yeah. That's what we call each other, right? So there are ways to keep that lineage going and these traditions going, right? The legacy is carried on through tradition, and I want to keep those traditions going. So if you say like 20 years from now, really I have huge dreams. I want to have my own production company. I want to continue to make the multicultural content that I make. I want to have my own TV show. I want to be in movies. I want to do that stuff, but also I want to give people the same feeling that I found for myself and empower people to embrace their own identity, whether it's that they're Black and Chinese or Black and Asian or multicultural and mixed, in whatever capacity that they need to find that love for themselves and their own identity. I want to help people to do that.
That's really cool. Well, Ryan, if people want to find out more about you or where to see the stuff you're making, where can they go?
On Instagram and TikTok, it's Ryan Alex H, RyanAlexh. Come join me on there for some laughs, for some education, for some smiles.
You make some funny stuff, especially recently, the Moon Knight episode 2. Oh man. That was bad.
We need to talk about that.
That was bad.
Yeah, that was bad. Man. I heard you talked about that in the previous episode. I heard that.
Yeah.
And I was just like, it was mind boggling, right?
I was trying to make a meme or something of it, and I saw what you made. I'm like, no, I can't beat that. I shared our Instagram account.
I appreciate that.
It was excellent. Yeah. It was really good. So we'll put a link in the show notes to your accounts on TikTok and Instagram. So encourage anyone to go follow his stuff. That. You have some great things out there. So
thank you,
Ryan. I really appreciate taking the time, sharing your perspective, your story. And this has been really enlightening. We've had a lot of guests on the show, but you are definitely the first Blasian we've had on this show.
Yeah. Hopefully not the last.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. Help us spread the word by sharing this with your friends, classmates, teachers, cousins, doctor, beautician, cynic, botanist, cowboy, sculptor, cartographer, and that one gal named Anna. You can subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And please write us a review so we know how we're doing. You can find us on Facebook and at MannerCompanion.com or tag us on social media, #MannerCompanion. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. The You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, Jared Turner, and our editor is Kaiser Guo at Sup China, and our interview editor is Dominic Edgley. I'd like to thank our guest interview, Ryan Alexander Holmes, and of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pastor. See you next time.